Good morning and welcome to How to Get Savvy with Emotional Intelligence. You're very welcome and thank you for joining this webinar. I see a few names on the registration list this morning that are very familiar to me, so welcome back and thank you for joining us. I really do hope that this hour that you spend with me will be really useful. For those of you that haven't used Crowdcast before, I'll just run through a few simple details. It does operate much like any of the other platforms that you may have used, but there are some slight differences. So you'll see the chat box. I'm just going to put a little message in there just to get things started. It'll help if I put my glasses back on again. So there we've got the chat box started. This platform doesn't enable two-way communication in asking questions, for example, but I would really love, good morning, Heather, lovely for you to join us. And I would love you to use the chat box to ask some questions and to make this session as interactive as we possibly can. Really, what you will see as well is the slides that I have for the session. I haven't forgotten to turn that on to presenter mode in case any of you think that that may be the case. It is because I kind of like to leave it this way so that we can perhaps use some of the slides and populate some information on those if necessary. So what we have is, I've explained the chat box, also what you have just down at the bottom of the screen, there is a little bar there. One of the things that I'm going to be talking about today is about how to measure emotional intelligence. And so that's a space for you there if you're interested in doing so. Heather will have already participated in this, Heather, so you will know some of this information and feel free to share anything that you'd like to share in relation to that experience. So that will allow you to book a slot if you are interested in finding out about your own emotional intelligence. So I'll get started here with the slides and what we're going to cover. So this morning, what I'm going to do is talk about what emotional intelligence is and why it's important. I'm going to talk about how emotional intelligence can be measured. And then we're going to look at how to access your own personalised emotional intelligence report towards the end. And what you may be thinking about, well, you know, what gives me the ability to do that? And so first of all, I'd like to share a little bit just about who I am and why I'm able to talk about emotional intelligence. My name is Julie Allen of Julie Allen Consulting. I have been an independent consultant now for over 20 years. I originally have a degree in hospitality management. I'm a chartered member of the Institute of Personnel and Development, and I also have a master's in business improvement. The one thing that I suppose runs through all of those three things in terms of my background is people. And so working in the hospitality business, it was key to know people, to understand people, and to try to ensure that those people had enjoyable experiences. My focus over the last 20 years has really been about creating great places to work. Many of you will know that I talk about those organisations that I work with. I am really keen to create organisations where people are really bouncing on Monday mornings, really looking forward to going to work. And when I say that, if we were in a room together, I'd often be greeted with a smile or a laugh. Would that really be possible? And I think it is possible to create that feeling in organisations that we're really doing something that matters. And emotional intelligence is connected with that. So over the years, some of you that have worked with me before will know that what I do is I work with people on their emotional intelligence, and I also use a tool called the ACT and Prosocial Matrix. Both of those are also about helping to improve emotional intelligence, or I will often use the term psychological flexibility. So I do that either in groups or an individual basis. So really, the key question for us today is, well, why are we having this conversation about emotional intelligence? And I'm interested, maybe if you could use the chat box just to outline for me even, why are you here this morning? What is it that you're trying to get from this? So today's workplace has many challenges. Challenges, COVID particularly, but take COVID aside, you've all got the challenge of running your business, operating your business successfully and effectively, and trying to survive. Some of you, it'll be now moving into the recovery phase as well. But reports identifying that 1 in 3 employees report some feeling of feeling uncomfortable in isolation. We also know, combined with that there is growth in stress, depression, and anxiety. So just as I'm talking, please don't be shy about using the chat box and letting me know what it is that you would like to get from the hour that we're spending together, because I would love to hear that, and I'd love to try to weave that into the session. So please, great. Okay, we're starting. Chat box is being populated. Improved self-awareness. Thank you, Catherine. Lovely to see you're here. Hi, Sharon. Thanks for joining us again. So there is growth in stress, depression, and anxiety, and that growth was evident in organisations pre last March. But clearly, COVID has really exaggerated that there is a bigger growth in stress, depression, and anxiety, because really, even in terms of briefly, something relates to emotional intelligence is about our mind and that self-awareness. So our mind is designed to look for danger, and in looking for that danger, it sees danger all around today. So people are on high alert all of the time. Danger in terms of COVID, danger in terms of my job. Is my job going to be here? Is my job going to change? What is technology doing to that job? And even just working in the home working is having a huge impact in terms of that stress. So a deeper understanding of emotional intelligence and how I can use it with the senior team, brilliant. How I can learn to motivate employees better and learn to assist employees with their emotional intelligence. Caroline, lovely to hear from you again. It's been a while. Thank you for joining us. Paul, again, thank you for contributing as well. So some of you will also have heard me talking about the VUCA world that we live in. So VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So we live in this volatile world. And that volatile world, if we can think back to what happened this time last year, when everything changed for us and the world became a different place. So as a result of that, we all had to change and adapt. So it was complex in terms of those changes, in terms of IT. If we think about volatile, even in terms of politics, geopolitical world, we definitely lived in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. But many people who have talked about with this before would have said, well, Julie, if that was the issue before, it's certainly now the case. Many of you have talked about, even in terms of your own objectives, it's about keeping people engaged. People have got a lot on. People have a lot going on in their minds, and a lot going on in terms of their emotions. And therefore, we as leaders in the organisation need to be very much aware of that. And so I hope to share some of that with you today. There are diminishing levels of trust across the world in organisations, and that is not helpful in terms of success. Also, we know that there is an accelerating rate of innovation, and my goodness, how much organisations have changed over the last 12 months. And even changes, as we all know, I think most of you in your organisations will have talked about, perhaps from time to time, change management. Managing change in organisations is pretty critical. It's something that's happening at a rapid rate. How do people feel about those changes? How are they responding to those changes? And that is something as leaders that we very much need to be aware of, keep in mind, and take action in relation to that. So how do we do it? How do we achieve that? Well, in terms of achieving it, first of all, what we need to do is, as leaders ourselves, we need to understand our own moods and emotions, and we need to understand how they impact on the people around us. We also need to be able to read and respond to the emotions of others. We've just talked about change in organisations. And when organisations change, some people will really love some of those changes and others won't. But we need to be able to read how individuals are dealing and coping with those changes, and also their response to their emotions, and how they also impact on others. So what you need to do also is to be able to learn how can you use your emotions to inspire and excite the team, because we know keeping people engaged while they are socially distant can be much harder to do, and while many of your workforces are working remotely. Also, what you need to do is to look for ways to continually develop your emotional intelligence to help you excel in your role. And what I hope to do today is to share some of how I do it. And I think it's something that we can never say that we have mastered. It is a skill that we need to continue to learn and develop, because we often use that term around use it or lose it. So with any skill, if you are not using it and continuing to develop it, then you will lose it. So it is about how do we continue with that. And I hope to cover all four of those aspects as we go through this 1 hour webinar. So really, what is emotional intelligence? And I think that is key that we ask that question so that we understand what we are doing. So emotional intelligence, the definition that I have here, is an individual's capacity to recognize their own and other people's emotions, and their ability then to use that emotional information to guide how they think, respond, and behave. And so those are the skills that we need to learn to develop. So classifying what does emotional intelligence mean will help me then to develop emotional intelligence. And today what I'm going to do is talk through really the practical definition. Is today what we're going to do is we're going to look at emotional intelligence as a collection of traits that can help you gauge those social and emotional situations and reactions with others. And the little quote that I have here, knowing others is intelligence, knowing yourself is true wisdom, mastering others is strength, mastering yourself is true power. And I think the question for you today, coming back to, if I can for a moment, the first area that I want to cover in terms of you and emotional intelligence is it's understanding how your moods and emotions impact on the people around you. So when we come back to the quote and the practical definition, it is about, today I'd like you to be thinking about how well do you know yourself? How well do you know your emotions and your response to those emotions? And that's pretty key. And well, why do we want to be doing that? Why do we need to be thinking about your own emotions, your response to those, your team's emotions, and their response to those? Well, Again, if we look at history and we look at organisations and how they've evolved. So in the past, a lot of jobs were all about muscles. It was manual work. Now they're all about brains. So, most of the people that we are recruiting in terms of their intelligence and their skills to be able to do particular tasks. But now in the future, it'll all be about heart. And if you think about, the skills that you have perhaps been developing over the last 12 months, a lot of those are about heart. Because some of the key behaviours that we have been observed in organisations over the last 12 months is one of those key leadership behaviours is empathy. And we've all had to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, all of those members of your team. We've had to have empathy. We've got to know people in much closer relationships we have with people. We now see people in their own homes. We perhaps have seen children. So I certainly have attended sessions when children have come along and their curiosity has wanted to get involved in the session and to have a look. So those are all things that we wouldn't have dreamed of perhaps this time last year. So we really want to be thinking about the heart of the organisation and really thinking about how we engage the workforce. And it's just sticking with that theme around, well, why does this matter? It matters for an organisation in terms of its success. And so if we look at those most admired organisations, perhaps even in the chat box, just to get a little bit of interaction again, maybe if you could highlight maybe some organisations that you believe are the most admired, those that your organisation perhaps aspires to be. And if we look at those most admired organisations, we can perhaps look to the research conducted by Fortune magazine, which found a strong connection between those most admired organisations and emotional intelligence. Anybody willing in the chat box to share with us any of those admired organisations that your organisation might aspire or might look to? Feel free to share that in the chat box. But if we look at what that research found, it found that really those organisations that were most admired also had executives with high levels of self-awareness. So if we look to some of your objectives in terms of the session, it's about having a better understanding of yourself. It's developing that skill of self-awareness. Also, those organisations, those executives displayed exemplary self-management, so able to manage themselves and also their emotions. Also, those organisations, those executives also demonstrated high social awareness. And also then in those highest performing firms displayed high social skills. So there we've got the social skills and the social awareness, and we've got the self-management and self-awareness. So those are what we have identified as the skills that we will find in those most admired organisations. And many of you will know that saying of people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. And if we look at the Gallup research that found the employees' time in an organisation and their productivity was directly correlated to their relationship with their immediate manager. So therefore, the relationship that any manager has with their team will influence and dictate productivity. Therefore, what we need to do is to spend time developing those relationships. And I think, gone are those days where managers would say, I don't come to work to be liked. I come here to do a job, and that's what I am here to do. But emotional intelligence and the evidence behind that tells us something different. If we look then even to the benefits of you as individuals attending this session, not only as leaders, but also as many of you are fathers, mothers, wives, husbands, you have a role outside of work as well. And so there are many benefits on a personal level to having developed emotional intelligence. And those are things like having more successful relationships with members of the team, successful relationships with your children, and with those other family members. Improved emotional intelligence allows you to communicate much better. Those with high levels of emotional intelligence will also have greater physical and mental well-being. They will be happier. They have a highlighted sense of self-awareness, and that's hugely important. And they'll be able to easily adapt their behaviour to a variety of situations. And as a result, are more likely to have a competitive edge. Hi, Jacinda. Jacinda is joining us by the look of it from New Zealand. So Jacinda, thank you for joining us. And I hope you find the session useful. So there are many benefits to developing emotional intelligence from a personal perspective, but also from an organizational perspective. It is key in the world that we are living in today. And that is going to be the case moving forward, because the world has changed dramatically and it's unlikely to revert back to where we were previously. So when we talk about emotional intelligence, then most people will be more familiar with the measurement of the IQ. Anybody on the webinar this morning that's ever had their IQ measured? I certainly haven't. But IQ is certainly something that we would have focused on in terms of the intelligence that individuals have. That's where the focus would have been before. Now we are also able to measure not only the IQ, but we're also able to measure the EQ, the emotional quotient, or the emotional intelligence. And so that's the ability to identify, assess, and control the emotions of yourself, of others, and also of groups. And that's what I want to talk about today, around those traits of emotional intelligence and how that is measured. So the tool that I use to measure emotional intelligence is Thomas International's TEIQ. The TEIQ stands for the Trait Emotional Intelligence Questionnaire. It is one of the most extensively validated EI measures. It views EI as a collection of traits. Some of you may be familiar with Daniel Goleman's model. That isn't what I'll be referring to, but there will be lots of similarities in terms of what we're talking about, because EI is EI, it's just packaged in different ways. So the TEIQ looks at an individual's self-perception of their emotional ability. So the TEIQ looks at an individual's view of themselves. So it simply sets out, this is your view of yourself. It is developed and owned by the University College of London, but bought and purchased through Thomas International. And it is registered and validated by the British Psychological Society as a robust, reliable and valid measure of EI. And with any assessment tool that you use, it is important that you understand and have assessed that the tool is a validated, robust and reliable tool, so that you know that what you're getting is something that has been tested and can be relied upon. So what I'd like to do now is to share those collection of traits and to explain those to you. So when we talk about emotional intelligence in the TEIQ, we look at 4 factors and 15 facets. So I appreciate with the screen sharing now, you might have some difficulty in reading all of this, but I am going to talk through the detail of this. So in terms of the 4 factors, we've got the well-being factors, self-control factors, emotionality factors, and sociability factors. And if I start with the well-being factors, so the well-being factors are made up of happiness, optimism, and self-esteem. And those are believed to be the traits which make up the well-being factors. So happiness deals with the present moment. So happiness deals with how happy and content am I with my life at this point in time. Optimism looks to the future. So how optimistic am I about the world and the life that I live? And the self-esteem facet. So we've got the 3 facets, 1 factor, just to clarify there. So self-esteem looks to the past, because self-esteem is really about the judgments that we make about ourselves, which come from the past. And really what you can see here is a variety of lines in this circle that you are seeing. So you'll see a faint outer line of which happiness has certainly almost moved up to. And then you will see an inner line just where we see emotional regulation. And we see an inner line again. So there are 3 circles here. And this is about whether we have an oversupply, an undersupply, or an average supply of that facet. The facet being the 15 facets. So 15 facets within each of the factors. So what we have here is in explaining your own emotional intelligence, and this is what I'd like you now to be thinking about, is if you were looking at any of these facets, where do you think you would be scoring yourself? So do you believe, in relation to the average person, that you have an oversupply of happiness, you're more happy than others, or that you might be less happy than others? Or the average supply is, I feel that I'm probably as happy as the next person. And in this case, what we see in this sample report is this individual has an oversupply of happiness. They are in the 97 percentile. So let me ask a question just in terms of your own emotional intelligence, being aware of the emotions of others around you. Can you think of a colleague perhaps that you might work with that might have an oversupply of happiness? And maybe just use the chat box to tell me, how might that person come across to other members of the team? So if we had an oversupply of happiness as an individual, how might I come across to other members of the team? Anybody willing to share that? Okay, in the absence of that at the moment, I'll help. So if you think that you've got somebody at the moment who's exceptionally happy, let's imagine we're having team or Zoom calls with our colleagues, and that we have somebody that's coming on to the call currently, even at the moment in remote working, bouncing onto the call, always very happy and upbeat. There will be other members of the team. They'll sometimes be regarded as nuts. Thank you, Heather. You're right. Sorry, Heather, I now see I read that wrong earlier. So Jacinta Ardern gets your vote in terms of your most admired. I absolutely agree. Jacinta has certainly been held up as one of those really great leaders during the last 12 months. So they may be sometimes regarded as nuts. And Sharon, yes, they may be regarded as very annoying and irritating. And so What this tool does is it is a self-perception tool. It is my view of myself or your view of yourself. Therefore, what it does is it helps individuals to understand the strengths in that and also where the downfalls of that might come. So the TEIQ views the facets as having strengths and areas of improvement if you are in the undersupply or the oversupply. So, yes, I'm happy and I'm upbeat and there are benefits to that, but actually that may cause some irritation and other emotional responses by other members of the team. Likewise, if I have an undersupply of happiness, so, you won't get a lot of smiles from me. I don't appear particularly happy. That, again, if we're meeting either virtually or physically with colleagues, that can also be regarded as quite irritating. It might be, for some, feel a little bit depressing that when they're with that individual, that they always pull them down. So the average supply may at times be what we're actually targeting to be. However, different situations require different responses. And so at a time like this as a leader, the next facet being optimism. We need to be optimistic to enable people to see that there is a way out of this, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that the business will succeed. So if we look at optimism being, is my glass half full or half empty? If I verge on either side of those, if my glass is always half full, if I am a very optimistic leader, and we've been going through this pandemic with listen guys, don't worry, it'll be all right. I've got it. We know what we're doing. It'll be fine. For those members of the team, that may come across as a bit of, running by the seat of your pants. So with the optimism, we need to think about those other individuals that I am communicating with. Where might they sit? What is it that they need? So people will need evidence in terms of it's going to be all right. Not just, guys, trust me, it'll be all right. So it helps us to understand the language that we use, how we communicate with others, and how we might need to change that. Self-esteem. Again, this individual has very high levels of self-esteem, so they are in the oversupply of self-esteem. And while it is great to be confident about yourself and your abilities, it can also have some downsides. So people with high self-esteem may find that they don't need to develop themselves, whereas people with lower levels of self-esteem will feel the need to continually develop themselves. So the important thing to remember is if you feel that you're low in an area, there's a benefit to that, but there's also a downside, likewise at the upper level as well. So it's looking at what are the benefits, what are the disadvantages of that, and how can I use that? So moving into then the second factor, which is the self-control factors. And the self-control factors have three facets. The first facet is emotional regulation. The second, impulse control. And the third then is stress management. So today, one of the big things of improving emotional intelligence is about being aware of your own emotional intelligence. So I'd like you to be thinking about now and maybe making note of where do I think I might sit in terms of these three facets. So if I start with emotional regulation, because there's a lot of emotion facets in here, just so that you have an understanding of them. So emotional regulation is my ability as an individual to regulate my own emotions. It is only my own emotions. So this individual, if we look at this report, is falling underneath the inner wheel, the inner circle. And what that means is they have an undersupply of emotional regulation. they feel that they are not necessarily able to regulate their own emotions. So that means that they might have an outburst of emotions, and that's all of those range of emotions that we experience. So that individual may not be able to hide when they're frightened or happy or sad, for example. And so that might mean that that individual wears their heart on a sleeve. Everybody will know about how they are feeling because they're not able to regulate and to control that. This individual also has an undersupply in terms of impulse control. So, even think about how impulsive are you? We can take that down into those smaller things in life. Am I really impulsive? So do I get an impulse to do something and then I just have to do it? That being the case, then you could possibly fall into the undersupply of impulse control. If I was very much able to control my impulses and I was in the oversupply of, that would mean that I'm not likely to do anything on a whim. I'm likely to want to get all the information that I need, even in terms of making a decision. So decision making can be much slower for individuals who have an oversupply of impulse control. And that may cause some irritation with the team, because some members of the team may feel, well, we don't need all of this to be able to move forward. Could we not just do something impulsively now and again? So that might mean for you as an individual, it's learning to be impulsive in your own personal circumstances in small areas, just to start developing that skill. Stress management, again, this individual has an oversupply of stress management. And in terms of stress management, what that means is they feel that they have all the tools, techniques available to them to manage their stress levels. Now, when we see stress management up at that high level, we've said there is a benefit, but there may also be a disadvantage. So we may say, great, this individual is managing their stress levels. However, the downside of that is, are they bottling their stress? Are they pushing it away, and are they ignoring it? So there's always something to look at and to talk about here in terms of exploring what is going on with the individual in relation to their scores. So those are the three facets then in terms of self-control. If we move into the emotionality factors, we can start then with empathy. One of those key emotional intelligence traits, I've said, that has been hugely needed over the last 12 months. And so that is, how able am I to see the position from someone else's perspective? And so with this individual, they're in an average supply, so able to do that. If we think about some of you, for example, I know joining may be working in the field of HR. So if you had low levels of empathy and you were working in HR, then that's something, a skill that you perhaps would need to develop. However, on the other side of that, if you were working in finance and you had lower levels of empathy, you were in an undersupply, it wouldn't be as much of an issue. So the TEIQ not only looks at factors, facets, but what they also do is they look at what is required, what is the emotional intelligence quotient required for individual job roles. So it's not always that we just look at this generically, but we think about the job that you're required to do and look at, well, is that a strength or a disadvantage in terms of that role? And that's something key to highlight. So emotional perception is emotional literacy. That is your ability to read your own and other people's emotions. And that is definitely a skill that we need to develop. And I'm going to talk about some tips later in terms of how we can go about developing these skills. So am I able to read those emotions of others and of myself? And in this case, this individual is in the average supply. If we had somebody who was in the oversupply of emotional perception, then there would be some questions really there as a leader, in that they might be spending a lot of time or too much time trying to read those emotions of themselves and of others. And I think that draws me to highlight something. I think that we as individuals from a very early age have been taught that high is good and low is poor. And I think when we look at emotional intelligence, particularly this tool, then we've got to get our heads around that that is not necessarily true or important in this case. So when the higher the percentage, the better. But what we can see here is that the higher the percentage, it will present us with some problems of which we'll need to learn to develop skills to deal with. So for example, if we saw this report and an individual had high levels in all 15 facets, then that definitely would be a huge problem. First of all, it would be highly unusual. You'd find maybe 1 to 2% of the population would be in that. So it's not something that you're going to see often. But then there will be development actions coming out of that. So if I move from emotional perception, having explained what that is, into emotional expression, and this individual has an oversupply of emotional expression. So if you remember, this individual also had an undersupply of emotional regulation, unable to regulate their emotions. In this case, they are also expressing those emotions. So they feel very comfortable expressing their emotions. They wear their heart in their sleeve, and they're happy that everybody knows that. Now, as leaders, that can be good at times. It is good to be able to show that vulnerability, to be able to express emotions, is to be able to say, particularly at the moment, I'm having a tough time. I don't have all of the answers. That is very helpful, because emotional expression does help in terms of loyalty and engagement with the team. But we've got to look at, is it too much? Is it too often? Because again, somebody on the lower end of the scale, in terms of an undersupply of emotional expression, that can also cause a difficulty with the team. So as a leader, if you're a leader and you don't express many emotions, what might be the difficulty with that? Anybody willing to share what you think the difficulty is if nobody can tell the difference between you being happy, sad, stressed? Nobody will ever know when you're stressed. It's hard to build a relationship. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sharon. So it's very hard to develop relationships, because somebody's going to come across perhaps as being cold, when simply they are not comfortable expressing themselves. So sometimes it's not that they don't want to, sometimes they don't know how to, and they think that it's going to come across as inappropriate. So it's helping people to develop those skills. Relationships also, in the emotionality factor, is it's your ability to start and develop relationships. And as a leader, that is key. Developing relationships with the team, developing relationships with peers, developing relationships with perhaps it might also be customers of the organization as well. So this individual is scoring in the oversupply of relationships. What that means is they feel very comfortable starting and maintaining relationships. The concern as we move up into the oversupply is is this individual spending a lot of time developing relationships? In other words, this could be a distraction strategy for them that moves them away from other areas. So that means that their work that they need to do could suffer as a result of the need for them to develop and maintain those relationships. We move now into the sociability factors, and the sociability factors then we come to emotional management. So emotion management now is the opposite of emotional regulation. That is now you managing the emotions of others. So the other people that you work with, that you live with, and your ability to do so. So in this case, this individual has an average supply, but you can imagine if somebody has an oversupply of emotional management, they feel very able to manage the emotions of others. That can be great in terms of managing the emotions of the team. There can be a downside to that also, in that people might feel that that leader is manipulative. So again, it's just being aware of my own perception of myself and how others might see that, how that might come across. Again, if I'm not able to manage the emotions, I don't feel I'm able to manage those emotions of the team on the undersupply, then that again is also going to have a difficulty with the team. So if we look at assertiveness, this individual is scoring oversupply and assertive, very able and willing to be frank and forthright for others to hear their opinions. And that is great. But what we also need to do when we are assertive is to ensure that we are enabling others who are not so assertive to hear their views and opinions. So it might be that we come across as the person who always has something to say, the person who's first to say something. And it's about learning when that is useful and when it isn't. It's learning when to sit back and when to hold back on our views and opinions so that we can hear those from others. Because all the time, emotional intelligence is about understanding our own emotions, our response to those, and understanding the impact that that has on other members of the team, but also being able to read and to manage that too, and to respond to that. So social awareness then is our ability to feel comfortable in different social settings. And this individual has an oversupply, so very comfortable. They might be the social butterfly, able to go into a room of different people and able to very comfortably talk to those. On the other end of the scale, an undersupply, anybody in undersupply, that would just be their worst nightmare. They would be fearful of that. They would prefer not to do it. So you start to understand, when you know this about yourself or other members of the team, why you get the excuses that you get. It is because they don't have those skills and don't know how to deal with those situations, rather than really just being difficult and not wanting to attend social gatherings. The two facets then at the end here, those are independent facets that kind of can be used right throughout. And so if we look at adaptability, well, look, adaptability is our ability to change and adapt in different circumstances. This is one I often find that people feel that they are quite adaptable, but when they complete this TEIQ, they can find sometimes that they're not as strong as they felt they were. So the question really is, how am I able to adapt to all those different changing situations? Am I someone that actively goes out and seeks change? Because those on the oversupply of adaptability will be seeking change out. They will be creating change in their team, and they'll be doing that on a regular basis. That might be great, but that might be far too much change for the team to cope with. They might think that this individual just changes things just for the sake of changing things. So the team can get very skeptical then if you've got very high levels of adaptability. Likewise, if you're at the lower end in today's world, definitely a skill that will require some development. Self-motivation is about what's driving you. Is it the internal or the external that's driving you? In this case, the individual has an average supply, but at the top end, those with very high levels of self-motivation will set themselves very high standards. They're driven internally. They don't need goals and targets or standards to be set for them. Many of you that are perhaps on the call, entrepreneurs, will have high levels of self-motivation. Those with the lower levels of self-motivation will need to be externally driven. So they will need to be managed. They will need goals and targets to be set, but also that's a skill that can also be developed. So looking at those 15 facets, 4 factors, this is how we measure each of those facets. So I want to explain the process of doing this. So the TEIQ, I've told you, is owned by London University, but it is Thomas International, a commercial company that uses that tool, of which you purchase a questionnaire and then subsequently receive a report that looks like the one that I've just shared with you. In that, there are 153 questions or statements, if you want, that reflect what an individual thinks of themselves. And so those statements require very honest views in terms of the responses. So the Likert scale is used from a strongly agree to strongly disagree. And in terms of establishing your perception of your emotional intelligence, in doing this, you need to be honest. Otherwise, you're going to get a report that really isn't any use to you. And the idea of doing this is not just to assess, but it is also to assess and then to invest in yourself. And what we've said is looking at how can I continuously develop myself, because what this will do is identify your key areas of development. In terms of the tool has a number of questions in there which are in effect honesty questions. So you may at times feel that, oh, I've already answered that question before, but really it is designed valid and reliable. It's been well tested. And so we will be able to ascertain from a report whether it's a valid and reliable report that can be used to help develop you, or whether it is unreliable and therefore, we wouldn't be able to use that in terms of helping to develop you. The questionnaire takes around 30 minutes to complete, so it's one of those things that you need some time and some space, quiet space, with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee to go through that and to be in the right frame of mind then to do that. Once you've completed the questionnaire, then you would receive a report. The report, you can see here a similar wheel of which I've just explained, and a detailed report that takes each of those facets and explains what that score means for you as an individual and how you might develop that. In terms of ethics, what we do is when we complete that questionnaire, you would have a 1-hour feedback session, because my experience of completing this over the years is that many people will perceive there to be problems that there may not actually be. And so that may come from somebody's self-esteem, but it's back to the point that our mind is designed to look for danger. And sometimes when we get this report and we read it, we see danger or we hear danger in the report that may not actually be there. So the report is about clarifying, the feedback session is about clarifying what the report actually says rather than what an individual perceives it to be saying. And then during that feedback session is maybe highlighting and agreeing for the individual some areas of development, 3 areas of development that we can either work on through a coaching process, or perhaps the individual goes away and starts to do that themselves. So how could we, if you think about your own emotional intelligence in terms of those 15 facets, where you think you might fall within those, what I would suggest in terms of any of those facets is that there are some things that you can practice to enhance your emotional intelligence. I mentioned earlier that I use both the ACT and the pro-social matrix. Some of you may have heard me talking about those before on different webinars. So the key thing in terms of your emotional intelligence is now to practice noticing. Practice the noticing of your own emotions and your response to them. So while we've all developed many skills, what we really need to do is as leaders is to spend the time noticing those emotions when they show up. What emotion is showing up? How does it show up for me? And how do I respond to that? So it's thinking about the emotions of, let's say, happiness. Happiness shows up. Where do I experience happiness? Is really understanding yourself. So where do I feel that in my body? What sensations might I feel when I am happy? How might others know that I am happy? Because how others will know is your response. So there is what is going on internally, noticing those emotions that show up, and noticing what people will see in the external world, see or hear in the external world when that shows up. What I'm also suggesting that you can definitely practice doing is to notice how other people are showing up to their emotions by being fully present. So noticing requires us to be in the moment, to be in the present moment. And so noticing when we are at a meeting is to really to see and to hear what people are saying. So I often say we need to listen with our eyes, also with our ears, because 55% of what people say is through the non-verbals. And when people aren't saying anything, they're actually saying something. So it's fully showing up too, and also showing up then with some compassion with those as well. So is, how also being aware then is how do others respond to you? Being aware of that response, being fully present and noticing how others are responding to you and to those different emotions. Also then it is to enhance your emotional intelligence, it's practicing the curiosity, is asking for others' perspective. So for example, when I mentioned the assertiveness, it's about asking other people's opinions. It's about ensuring that your team also know that you don't have all the answers and you are not the expert. And so it's asking people for their perspective. It's about exploring the why with people. Why do people do things in a certain way? Why do people respond? It is about being curious and understanding the individuals, because it's only at that point that you'll understand why and what can be done about that. And it's also when perhaps you receive some criticism from the team or from your peers, it's about noticing how you respond to that criticism and noticing if you're taking offense and noticing why that is occurring, and perhaps thinking about a different response. So being curious to why I'm responding that way. What I also have to share with you in terms of the enhancing your emotions and noticing is, this is a great graphic from Susan David. If any of you are on LinkedIn, I'd suggest Susan's a great person to follow. If you're following me on LinkedIn, you'll find that I often share many of her posts. And what she's saying is, even in terms of your emotions, I'm saying notice. You might even keep an emotional diary. notice the emotion, but go beyond the umbrella term for that emotion. So, is it that I am really embarrassed, or is it a case that I am feeling guilty, for example, or am I hurt? Is it that I am annoyed? So looking beyond those initial emotions and really digging into noticing inside, what am I really feeling? So I will share a copy of the slides. I will email those after the webinar is complete. And you will also know that this session through Crowdcast is always recorded. It is available there for you to use and to go back to. So you'll be able to find a copy of that here. And also then I mentioned LinkedIn, so feel free to get in touch and to follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter, because again, that's the place where I'm trying to share. Psychological flexibility is much like emotional intelligence, in that psychological flexibility is our ability to notice what matters and to do what matters even in the presence of unwanted and difficult emotions or thoughts. And so the ACT matrix and emotional intelligence are very much related, which is why when I do coaching in terms of emotional intelligence, I will use the ACT matrix to help develop those skills. If any of you are interested in accessing your own personalised emotional intelligence report, you'll see the green bar at the bottom of the screen, which says arrange your personalised emotional intelligence report. If you click on that, a calendar will pop up that will allow you to arrange a time and a date to meet with myself to discuss purely, it's a free consultation to allow you to discuss the needs of your team. So it might be that you'd like to have a report done. It might be that you'd simply just like to have a chat about emotional intelligence and the needs of your team. So please use that link to get in touch and arrange a date to meet. I'm conscious it's 12:02, so I'm 2 minutes over my time, which it means it's 2 minutes of your time now being eaten up. Perhaps before we go, I'd like to ask any questions for me or any comments that you'd like to make about emotional intelligence and how you could improve your emotional intelligence. Thank you, Catherine. That's very kind of you. Catherine's, yes, she would highly recommend Julie. Very much appreciate that. I hope you're keeping well, Catherine. Thank you, Sharon, also. And Geraldine, thank you. Yes, the noticing. Geraldine, yes, you'll have noticed before. So the noticing is key in emotional intelligence, noticing what's showing up for me and for others. That's the key question that I'm always asking. So what's showing up right here, right now? And it looks like perhaps Catherine is making some connections in this small village that we live in. Heather, it was great for you to join. I hope it was a useful refresher for you. Caroline, yes, lovely to hear from you as well. Thank you for joining me. I hope that it was useful for you in terms of taking some time out of your very busy diaries. I think that's one thing that COVID has done for everybody. It has just made the day so much busier. We're fitting so much more in, and there's much more to be done. Please get in touch. I'd love to have a chat with you and take this further. Or if you have any suggestions of any further webinars that you would be interested in, please feel free to put those in the chat box now also, because I like providing webinars that are going to be of use to you and that you will get some benefit from. So love to hear any themes that are currently issues in your organisation, and I'll certainly think of some solutions for those. Thank you. Thanks for attending. Stay well. and have a great weekend.